So generally, I'm not, there are other ways of using military action against the site about which I really don't particularly want to speak. So now we get to the third point here, and what on the way this would unfold. Remember, first, the sanctions pressure. Second, the expectation they will not be permitted to succeed in the end. And third, that there's a deal that is imaginable, or as they used to say in negotiating land, a yesable proposition for the Iranians. Now, what does that proposition look like? Certainly, let's hit the easy points. No more production of 20% enriched uranium and the removal of the stocks of 20% enriched uranium. One might say no production above 5% and the removal or limiting on the amount of stockpiling of 5%. One might want to not forget about the plutonium track and say that, well, the heavy water production facility, the heavy water moderated reactor, this all has to be stopped in its tracks. What about monitoring? Well, if this facility was going to allow it to continue to operate, then one would want to say you have to have at least IAEA plus the additional protocol, and maybe also ad hoc P5+1 sanctions regime on top of that. Indeed, you'd want an agreement that there were not going to be any expansion of the deep underground enrichment facility. That would be the more known, first known enrichment facility, and not Fordo near Guam. So you try to constrain this program. I think an interesting question for all of us is to ask whether we are prepared to accept uranium enrichment in Iran at all. If the answer to that is yes, so that you have a yesable proposition and believe that Iran could not accept a complete end to the program, then one must ask oneself where one is headed generally in the international community. Iran, with a single power reactor at Bushehr, hardly has need of enrichment program. If you decide, after all this, all the nuclear weapons work they've done, and the secret facility they have, and all the pressure to stop them, we're still going to allow enrichment, then I ask you, what position do you take on the 123, or the 123 agreements, as they're now called? What is the standard that you want to have in the Middle East and around the world for fissile material facilities for non-nuclear weapon states? If the answer is you really want that, what has been called the gold standard, the initial standard with the United Arab Emirates deal, then what are we doing with Iran if you allow enrichment to continue? I know the pushback is easily there. We're trying to avoid use of military force and cap a nuclear weapons program. So I think men and women of goodwill can disagree, and I would really like to hear you all disagree. Okay, so moving around. It seems to me there are some other questions that are still useful to ask. Question 3, and this is a hard one for us. If diplomacy should fail on April 13th and the days that follow, we could define what failure means, but I think we kind of have a good idea. And there's no other trigger, in other words, nothing dramatic happens except the slow accumulation of material, sort of the building of that image of a robust breakout capability in Iran. At what point does the United States act, or does it not act? I think that is of course, a key question for us. And now some interesting thought questions. Question 4. Do you think deterrence will work in the case of Iran if we were talking about deterring Iran from using nuclear weapons should they acquire them? Do you think, in other words, if you're trying to look ahead at what the Middle East would look like if there was breakout, if the Iranians produced nuclear weapons, ask the questions, would deterrence work? So that Iran, having nuclear weapons, could do nothing with them. What has North Korea done with its nuclear weapons? I recognize Northeast Asia is not the Middle East, but I think it's still an important question to ask. Do you think Iran would be deterred deterred from using nuclear weapons? And I think the answer to that is yes, they would be deterred. Could Iran credibly threaten to use nuclear weapons? In other words, would there be the use of, by threat, use in quotes here, so that they would gain such political advantage in any engagement in the region with Israel, with crucial states, with the kingdom, with other countries? Do you think they could credibly threaten, or would they be deterred from that? I think they'd be deterred from that as well. I don't think there'd be a credible threat of use. Third here, could Iran ever expect to be able to deter a first strike by the United States, disarming Iran, if we chose to so strike? My answer to that is no, they could not expect that. We would be able to, at any point from now on to the foreseeable future, be able to launch what is in the strategic business sometimes called a first strike. We could disarm Iran, and they would have to know that. Fourth in this list of questions, could Iran deter an invasion aimed at regime change in Tehran? Yes. I think if that hits the purpose, one of the purposes of nuclear weapons acquisition by Iran, that one would have to think more than twice about invading a country and taking down its regime if that regime had access to nuclear weapons. For obvious reasons we could talk about if you wish, but I think they're pretty clear. Finally, in this list of questions, what is the greatest threat from an Iranian nuclear weapons program that we actually have to worry about? Now, you could answer that lots of ways. You could say, well, military action being used to stop it and the consequences of that, wherever Iran has assets, et cetera, they would use them, death and destruction in the Middle East, the United States, and elsewhere. Yep, that's one of the consequences. What else? Well, other states would be prompted, provoked to acquire nuclear weapons, a domino theory. So next you'd see Syria, Egypt, whatever your particular image of dominoes is in the Middle East, it'd be provocative. Third, it may not be rational. We're always worried about that in the case of North Korea, worried about that in almost any case, that somehow there's a leadership in Iran that doesn't respond to the deterrence that I was proposing to you it should respond to, and it uses a nuclear weapon against the state of Israel, against another country, against the United States, against a European country, against all logic or reason. That's a concern. For me, the answer, though, is a fourth, and it is not any of those. It is not a highly probable, but possible decision by Iran, if it had accumulated enough fissionable material, fissile material, that it would transfer some and hope to get away with a secret transfer and to a non-national terrorist group, such that that terrorist group might do what Iran would be deterred from doing, which is detonated in a major American or Israeli city. That, to me, is the quintessential threat here, and enough for me to be more concerned about the accumulation of fissile material than I am really about the actual accumulation of weapons. So I would propose to stop there. There's probably enough that I've said that you don't agree with to move on, and if we can do that.
Thank you very much. Well, I was going to sit down here.